So welcome everybody. Today we have Seth Ollila, he's the CEO for a company called Novotta. He's out of Green Bay, Wisconsin, and real happy to talk with Seth today. Seth, you and I have known each other, oh gosh, now for about a year and a half or so. We met each other kind of as a result of the digital asset space, which is really how our tech talks got started. It was originally Crypto University, and then we've moved over time to obviously focus on just all sorts of emerging tech and technology. So with that, Seth, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? I would love to hear a little bit about your background. We'll certainly have just kind of an open conversation, but I'd love to have you talk a little bit about, where you've kind of evolved from a business standpoint, what got you interested in this space. You've got a background with banking, and so would love to hear a little bit about you and the company, and then we'll talk about maybe some of the challenges that particularly smaller financial institutions have with adopting technology, integrating technology, and getting the kind of functionality they're looking for from maybe their cores or their processors. So with that, Seth, I'll turn it over to you and welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. So as you mentioned, my background's primarily in banking, 20 plus years, variety of different sizes of institution from de novo to large national bank, primarily focused in the operations and technology space. And as you alluded to, we met more recently. I was with a startup in the digital asset or crypto space. Unfortunately, us, like many others in that space, didn't quite get to where we wanted to. Just a lot of headwinds with regulatory and market landscape. So as my partner and I thought about what we would do next, we really wanted to leverage our experience in the bank tech space, integration, just building stuff. We've done a lot of integrations to digital banking platforms, cores, et cetera. So how do we parlay that into a more successful business than the one in the digital asset space? And we also wanted to focus on, maybe a market that's not as sexy as some of these other industries, whether that was digital assets, BaaS, AI. There seems to be kind of this trend in banking where every year or two there's a new hot topic. And we felt that kind of the operational needs that a lot of community banks had weren't being addressed, whether that's from fintechs or from, big cores or even development firms. There didn't seem to be a lot of players that were trying to solve some of these challenges that a lot of community banks and credit unions had. So that's really how we ended up where we're at today. So we focus on, either building our own product that can be deployed to, a large number of institutions, or very specific products that a bank or credit union may have, whether that's a niche market they're in or just some really unique problem they're trying to solve.
So Seth, you mentioned the kind of some of your last venture, which was around the digital assets. I would say you lasted as long as everybody else did, including NYDIG, which I think had $1 billion in funding or investment. So I would not feel bad about that. That was one of those ones where the headwinds from a regulatory standpoint just were not with us. And as a lot of people know, the SEC eventually allowed the launch of a few kind of Bitcoin ETFs, which I probably think satisfied the desire for some of the digital assets for people who are out there that were looking to get it from kind of a trusted financial institution. But I think you guys did a bang up job with that, and I know that you had a number of integrations. I think you had with Alchemy and Bano, so you were very familiar with that integration space, and having built something like that, I can only imagine the experience that you've got with this.
Yeah, definitely. And that, like I mentioned, that's a lot of the reason why we made this pivot to kind of the integration or building type of landscape. And I will comment, I think if we would have raised $1 billion, we might have lasted a little longer, but we didn't have that luxury.
Now, you serve banks and credit unions. Do you serve fintechs as well? Are you kind of agnostic in terms of who you guys provide development for?
Yeah, we do work with some fintechs as well. So a lot of times their needs are, similar as far as wanting to integrate to a specific solution, or, just a lot of times what we see in fintechs as well, they don't have a lot of the industry knowledge that, is required to build into some of this more legacy technology. So we think that's a differentiator. There's a lot of dev shops out there that can build anything, but there's not a lot of dev shops that have very specific industry knowledge that can, provide guidance more than just, building something.
Yeah, so talk a little bit more about that industry knowledge and kind of the depth you have with that, and how that was developed. Maybe some of the other folks within your firm and maybe their background. Would love to just hear what, again, to your point, there's a lot of dev shops out there, but not necessarily a lot of dev shops that understand banking or credit union space. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about some of that experience.
Yeah, I think it goes back to just, myself and others having a lot of experience working in financial institutions, right? So when we get on a call with a potential client or an existing client, we can, speak their language, right? They don't have to explain in detail what they're trying to do, or, how it potentially needs to work with other systems. So, we understand challenges of, different cores, different digital banking solutions, or even the inability in some cases to integrate with those. Some of the biggest vendors out there don't even have the ability for fintechs or banks or credit unions to integrate directly into their solutions. So just giving kind of that guidance before someone goes too far down a path to figure out what or how they can potentially build something.
Yeah, and I know from our experience, some of the larger providers in this space, they're always developing new solutions, but they're not always going to develop a specific solution for a financial institution unless it's one of the Big Ten, the really large ones. That development cycle tends to be fairly long. So you guys are serving something that maybe just exists in the market from a lack of service from either from the vendors or maybe from a cost standpoint. So maybe if you can talk a little bit about that and what is that particular niche you guys are serving?
Yeah, so I think the challenge that a lot of banks or credit unions have experienced is when they go to maybe their core to try to talk about building a solution, the price is typically just astronomical, right? As well as the timeline. You're typically seeing 300 plus an hour for development, and you see it being padded, and there's just, no way that some of the solutions that we're trying to build would ever be developed by these big players, because it's, six figures minimum to even start. So we've really focused on smaller solutions that don't require a ton of development, but can be, fairly quickly implemented and reused by, multiple financial institutions.
And how small or how big, like where's the kind of cutoff where a financial institution might have enough in-house development solutions and or their partners are willing to do that development for them because they're a big enough client? Is there kind of a natural cutoff there?
Well, typically what we see is when a financial institution gets to maybe 4 or 5 billion, they've got some development resources internally. Maybe a little sooner on the credit union side, because that size credit union has, significant more members than a bank would have customers at that size. So, they may have the resources. That being said, there's typically limited capacity even with a, 2 or 3 person development team at a financial institution. So there's sometimes that need to use external resources to address capacity. As far as getting one of these bigger providers like a core to build product for you, I don't even know what that number is where you can get their attention, but it's not 4 or 5 billion. It's, tens, if not hundreds of billions, where you'll start maybe getting them to work with you to build something else. I would say we've just seen that a lot of these big players, and I don't want to name names, everybody can probably speculate, but they don't build a whole heck of a lot anymore. They either buy stuff or, just continue to try to enhance what they have in place today.
Yeah, we've seen a lot with kind of the concept of side cores being patched onto some of these older legacy systems. What's some of the development as you talk to financial institutions? What are some of the development solutions that they're looking for? So you said, core providers, and I can think about like the functionality that comes with a core or digital banking providers. Like what type of projects are financial institutions looking to undertake that they can't get from their existing providers today?
Yeah, I can give you examples of some of the stuff we've been working on. Um, One of the products we're in beta with a bank right now is called Branch ID. And it's a fairly simple solution. It allows for the bank or credit union to identify their customer or member either remotely or in branch using facial recognition. So for the remote portion, we're just sending out SMS, email, or voice um, to authenticate that user, and that's customizable. The bank may just say we just want to do SMS as an example. And one of the ways we've done that in a way that's been very attractive to community financial institutions is we house that in their environment, so on their network. So we've got an application that interacts with a database that's populated nightly via core extracts, right? So we don't have to do real-time integration, which adds, significant cost to a project. And in a lot of cases, the bank or credit union doesn't even have real-time access to the core. So we can, stand that up fairly quickly. It's all contained in their environment. No PII is going out the door. And it's, it solves a problem that a lot of smaller banks and credit unions have. And that's how do you authenticate a user or a customer when they call into the call center or branch. As far as the facial recognition side of that, again, using the same database infrastructure, we only pass a picture and a CIF number or name ID externally, so no PIIs going out the door. Doesn't even know what bank it's coming from when we send it to our facial recognition API. So that's an example of one of the solutions. It's really cost effective. One of the things we always think about, like, how much is a bank going to save, or how much does this really, what's the value in this product to them? Because that's another place where we've seen lack of alignment between the big cores and the smaller banks, right? They may have a solution, but sometimes it's just completely unrealistically priced, and the bank or credit union says, well, that's great, but I'm not going to pay, $100 to save $10.
And so I think one of the things you were talking about there was the benefit of some of this in-house or not in-house, it's actually kind of sourced out to you development, is that data can be manipulated and utilized on premises, right? So on-prem as opposed to maybe sent out to the cloud or somewhere else. And I think, at least the core providers people are comfortable with, but they've kind of strapping on this concept of side cores that maybe they bought a business or a solution that may be out in the cloud or somewhere else. And are you getting any pushback from financial institutions that might be concerned with moving that data off-prem?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you talk to these smaller financial institutions, and again, I'm referencing like that 5 billion and less space typically, having another application that houses PII outside of the organization in the cloud, just it immediately raises red flags, and it's a concern, right? Especially for something as small as this type of application, right? They don't necessarily want to have all these different microservices or micro applications having data, because it's just one more opportunity for data to be compromised. So we do feel like, although it's a little more of a challenge to build and deploy a on-prem solution, it resonates better with that market we're trying to sell to. At least that's our opinion. I could be wrong, but it seemed to resonate with everyone we've spoken to in the space at this point.
And what are some other solutions? I think you've got a, and I could be wrong, but I think you've got a product that you've been building or maybe helping some partners build that addresses, like I said, a deposit building solution. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we've not built that, to be transparent.
Okay.
We've done most of the design work and had been trying to find a beta bank to do it. It actually was an idea. I don't know if you know Neil Stanley over at the Core Point, but he had come up with this concept, and we'd worked with him to design it, and we'd spoken to a couple different financial institutions, but it hadn't moved forward. I think the problem there was, and this is not uncommon, when you try to introduce products that don't exist in the market today or don't typically have competitors, it's sometimes hard for the bank or credit union to like get their arms around what that means for their, sales process or operational processes. So yeah, I, I did want to mention one other product we've built and we're working to beta with another bank as well. It's kind of a trimmed down workflow application. What we saw with again one of the larger core providers is that they've got tools that banks or credit unions can use, but they're reliant upon the core provider to actually do the workflow building or kind of the use cases within the application. So as an example, if you wanted to implement a workflow in OnBase or Director or whatever you call it, for onboarding treasury management customers, you'd have to go back to a core provider to build that out. And sometimes those rates are 350, 375 an hour. And by the time the bank gets a quote to build that one process, like, again, it's like, wow, that doesn't make financial sense. We'll continue to do this via email and, Word docs or spreadsheets or some other tool that they might have. So what we built is a customizable workflow tool that can integrate with third-party solutions, but allows the bank or credit union to build out their own custom workflows and not be reliant upon a vendor that charges a pretty high rate.
And so you mentioned some of those hourly rates. I've got to imagine some of these projects can get up to $100,000 plus from an implementation standpoint or development standpoint.
Not from us, but some of the other providers. Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of cases they don't even get below 100. That you're starting in the six-figure range, which again is not feasible in a lot of cases for smaller financial institutions trying to solve smaller problems.
Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say the other thing we look at when we're talking to a financial institution about a product is it something we can reuse with others, right? Because that'll impact price. A lot of firms don't care. They just want to get paid 100% of the development for what they're doing, and then it's kind of done. Whereas we look at it like, okay, we build this for you. We think we've got a market where we can sell it to. So we're going to build it at a pretty significant discount to get a bank or credit union on it, and then see what we can do with it.
Yeah, so you're kind of socializing those costs among potentially a wider field.
Yeah, and I think that I think banks and credit unions historically have not. A lot of them haven't gone out and tried to scope out building product because it's been so expensive. But as firms like us have started to be more prevalent, as the technology has gotten better, Fiserv as an example, 4 or 5 years ago, you couldn't even get to the core, right, on Premier or Precision, but now with Communicator Open and J Exchange has been around for longer. So there's a lot more opportunity now to build solutions at a lower cost. So I would encourage banks or credit unions that haven't, kind of dipped their toe into figuring out, can we build stuff at a reasonable cost in recent history to look at that again.
So yep, talking about programming costs coming down. One thing I talk on AI quite a bit, as does one of our other employees, Connor Heaton, who really leads our AI practice. But one of the things I've speculated now for a while is will AI get to the point where, a financial institution that may not have a bunch of programmers or a development partner, could they develop something on their own? And I know that in the programming space, that a lot of coders are struggling to find jobs just because AI is being leveraged so much to develop code. And the other day I was like, I wonder if I can build something myself. And I grew up in the age of the first video game was Pong. And I thought, well, okay, can I get Chat GPT to build me, give me the code to run a Pong program. And I said, so, ChatGPT, I want you to, give me some programming code to be able to kick off this game, old-fashioned game Pong. And I said I want to use the up and down keys for controlling the paddle, and I said I want to be able to use the escape key to break out of it. And it wrote me code in Python. Now I know nothing about Python, but then I asked ChatGPT, how do I get this loaded on my Apple? And said, okay, well, you need to download Python and you need to open a terminal window and you're gonna need to put this in the right directory. But it walked me through it, and within 15, 20 minutes, I had Pong going on my computer. I thought, well, that's pretty amazing because I don't know anything about programming. It's been a long time since I've even taken a programming class back in college, and I was able to run something simple like that. So I thought, well, what's the opportunity for if you had a good developer or someone that understood banking and they were looking for a custom application, could they just get the AI to generate that code? And I mentioned this to you the other day, and you had a good response that I hadn't really considered, which was around kind of, understanding banking and regulatory aspects and some of those things. And so maybe you can talk a little bit about, is AI going to replace the need for custom development, or is it going to be leveraged by the cores to do this stuff cheaper? Is it something that there's always going to be a need for solution providers like yourselves, or are you guys utilizing AI to make code generation easier for you and keep the cost down for your clients?
Yeah, I guess to answer your last question first, yes, we do use some of those tools to make our life easier and to, maybe help us solve some problems that we don't have, significant depth of knowledge in. But I think, at least in the near to midterm, the challenges around the extreme nuances of banking technology, I struggle to see AI solving those problems, right? So, integrating an LOS into a core and the nuances of those integrations, or using the SDK from Alchemy and going through that whole process of writing code, submitting it to their SDK team, getting it approved, deploying it. I just think there's too many things involved, at least at this point, where, AI could really build out a solution effectively and deploy it in our industry. And then again, like I talked about earlier, just kind of that industry knowledge of providing guidance on developing a solution. Although AI certainly will likely do that at some point, I just don't know that we're there yet. And then the other thing I think of is, from a regulation or exam standpoint, if you're building your own solutions in-house, having that software development process, documented and safe and secure, and being able to, you know, effectively communicate to your regulator how you're building solutions. I think if you said, well, we're using AI to build everything and it just works, is probably unrealistic and not recommended.
Yeah, it was when you told me that the other day, I was thinking, oh yeah, one of the things is you probably have to have like third-party code review and make sure there aren't back doors, and like how do you know this stuff was generated properly? Well, how come financial institutions just don't have their own, or at least smaller ones, their own development teams? Is it just too darn expensive? Is it, finding the right talent? Is this finding talent that understands banking and programming? Like, why aren't financial institutions just developing this stuff on their own? Is it just too much of a lift?
Yeah, I think talent and cost is probably one of the biggest reasons, right? It's typically not one person where you say, okay, we want to start building our own things, right? To do that with one person, you typically it's not feasible, right? It's hard to put in the process, the controls, the redundancy, the documentation, kind of all the things that you would expect to have in place if you were building your own solutions. We're actually working with a financial institution right now that did have one person. That person's no longer there, and we're trying to unwind and fix some of the things that having a one person software development team caused. I think the other thing is historically, banks haven't had as much openness as they currently have. Again, we talk about the API layers to the core being more prominent now. We talk about, third-party digital banking solutions like a Q2 or an Alchemy or, Narmi. There's just more opportunity now than there was, 5 to 7 years ago to build solutions. Then again, not everything needs to be integrated with those solutions. Sometimes we use batch extracts, like I mentioned before. But yeah, I think in talent, right? Just finding those people, they're not super cheap. They're not always easy to find. So it's cost, it's talent, it's just changing in landscape.
Yeah, I also imagine that, to your point, if you lose someone with institutional knowledge, that could be a big deal, especially if you built some custom code using that person, and maybe you don't understand it, or you don't have a partner that you can go back to say, hey, how do we fix this, or how do we update this, right?
Yeah, and some of that can be averted with good documentation and controls in place. But a lot of times, what you see again, if you've got one person, they're just trying to build stuff and they don't care about documenting it or yeah. So even if you had one person, documentation is critical, because if they do leave, someone like us or someone, hiring from the outside, like it's really hard to just jump in and figure out what was built and how it's working. Sometimes it's easier to just rebuild it.
And are you sourcing out any programming to other third party, or are you doing all the programming yourselves, kind of in-house?
We do the majority of ourselves. We've got one individual that we rely on occasionally for some cloud-based knowledge. I'd be lying if I said we have expertise in all areas. So we do occasionally use third parties to assist us with, very specific needs.
Okay. And maybe this isn't a fair question, because maybe there's not consistency among financial institutions or maybe among core providers, but is it like, if you had to list out, if I asked you what were the top 3 kind of consistent development requests that financial institutions would have that maybe their core or their digital banking provider aren't offering? Is there like a top 3 or maybe top 4 or 5 list that you could give me, or is it really
I don't know that I'd give like specific examples of like what they want built and consistency there. What I would say is a lot of times it evolves around connecting systems that aren't connected today, right? So that could be moving data from a core to a CRM or a marketing type system. That could be, exposing things into either digital banking or exposing digital banking things to a third party like a CRM or a marketing type of system. So it's really, connect. I think a lot of case integration type work where they just know if these two systems talk, there's processes that could get better.
Yeah. And so we talked about some of the expense of doing this development on your own, or asking a core provider to do it, even assuming the core would do it for you. And you said it would be, there's quite a bit of cost savings in having a partner like yourselves do that. I mean, you can't give a quote, but like, what's the differential? Is it like 3 times more expensive to have your core developer, your core do it for you, 10 times more expensive? I know, I'm sure it's dependent on project, but I imagine there's probably a magnitude that you might be able to give me.
I would say it's significant, even if you can get your core to do it. So a lot of times, it's just they don't even really have a team to build some of this stuff out. So as an example, if you wanted to move data from your core to a third-party system, they might not even have the resources to do that. Or if they do, it could be an extremely long timeline. So I would say typically significantly higher in cost, and typically timelines are extremely long. So yeah. I,
Right.
the other thing we always think about when we're building solutions is like, how do we make them not core dependent? Um, we think about, and there's been a fair amount of movement, especially in the community bank space, of moving away from some of the larger players to, smaller cores. And we don't want to put the financial institution in a position where if they leave their current core provider, like everything that's built is throwaway. So like the branch ID product, right? So we use core extracts. Well, the format of those extracts, we could get that data from any core. So if they went from, core A to core B, that product isn't throwaway, right? It might take us, 10, 15 hours of development work to move it from core A to B, but by and large, everything that was implemented is not throwaway. Whereas if you were to do like that workflow example where the core would build it, that's on a core specific product. Well, if you move core, all those workflows you built are likely garbage, right? You're going to have to go to some new solution to build some of those workflows or processes out. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
It does, and I had another question that came up with that from that. So what code is typically used? Like, I know nothing about code, but like what code is used these days for programming? Like I remember hearing about some of these old core systems that were built with COBOL, and they had to find, developers that were 70 years old that worked on this thing, decades ago to make any changes. Where is this stuff headed in terms of code? And then a follow-up question to that would be, you mentioned kind of some institutions, and we've seen this with like de novo banks where they're not, they're starting up and they're coming with like a cloud core or something very different than these legacy systems. I've got to believe, that's certainly a bit more flexibility. And I think that, and maybe I'll talk about this here in a bit, but I think some of that might even ultimately go to blockchain where you're sharing a ledger. But what if you can maybe address first, like what's this stuff coded in, and then maybe you talk about like, financial institutions and moving to kind of cloud-based cores as opposed to some of these older, larger, more ones that we're more familiar with.
yeah, I mean, I'll be transparent. I'm not a developer either, so I don't know that I can offer a great opinion on like what
Good,
technologies
okay.
I'd recommend to build solutions. I will say though, a lot of times it's dependent on what we're integrating into or how we're designing the system. So we use a lot of different languages to build different solutions. And again, sometimes it's dependent on, the core, the digital banking solution, the LOS. There's just a ton of variables there. I would say on the cloud type core, I mean, I think that's inevitable that, openness will continue, that, blockchain, the kind of the things you were alluding to will become more prevalent because we do, even with some of our solutions, we do experience issues with performance, right? It might take 5 to 7 seconds to retrieve a customer and their associated accounts, and that's because of the underlying technology that core resides on. So like speed does present itself as an issue in a lot of cases, and I think that more modern technology stacks and cores are going to make some of those problems go away.
I saw there was a white paper, this goes back a few months ago, that AWS was looking at providing or thinking about could that be used for core solutions. And then I
I,
know, go ahead.
I would just make one like comment on core and kind of our thought on core, and this goes back to when I was at the last bank I was at. Our goal for the core was to bring it back to the accounting system it was originally intended to, you know solve for, right? If you look at cores in the 70s, like that was the goal of the core, right? Don't calculate interest manually, process transactions, etc. And when you saw things evolve in the 80s and 90s with telephone banking and teller systems and online banking and all these other things that kind of got bundled around the core, it made it really complex, and it made it really hard for a lot of smaller banks to like get away from core and buy best in practice. And what I think you're going to see a shift in is more kind of back to making the core the core. Do the accounting things, do the things the core is designed for, but then really allow for banks and credit unions to go and like slap on whatever they want to, deliver the best customer experience, whether that's to their external customer or to their internal customers and users.
Yeah, I kind of feel like some of that underlying technology might ultimately go to blockchain, because if you think about what a core is, it's just a ledger system, it's an accounting system, like you said. In the benefit of having a shared core or shared accounting system would really, it'd speed up settlement. It'd eliminate some of the reconciliation issues that you typically have in banking and using two-tiered accounting. It's interesting. There's a number of banks, large bank consortium out there. It's kind of the same consortium that worked with on the clearinghouse and in Zelle. And the banks are working on something called the Regulated Liability Network. And I've talked about that before. It's a unified ledger where, they've not prescribed under what the underlying technology is or would need to be. But if you read it, if you read the white papers, it's almost has to be a blockchain. And it's one of those things where if you got a consortium like that and they build something like that, they can kind of sell that, and it would minimize the number of cores that were out there or even needed. You could potentially put everyone on the same one. And it's something the Bank for National Settlements is pushing as well. I don't think that's anything that's going to become anytime soon. But as this technology advances, it would be interesting to see if we move from these old core legacy systems to something more flexible that's cloud, and then maybe something ultimately that eliminates this need for everyone having their own ledger system with using a unified ledger.
Yeah, I mean, I think in theory that's a good direction to move to, and I think it does solve a lot of problems and can take a lot of waste out of kind of the expense that financial institutions have managing cores. There's a lot of questions that come to mind, and I'm sure this is why it's going to take a long time. But just like how in practice do banks interact operationally and deliver differentiated product? And yeah, I think there's a lot there. But I agree that that's something that is of tremendous interest to you and me and probably everybody else that kind of understands the challenges that we have in this industry.
One thing I'd be curious about, and it's talked a lot about in the industry, is leveraging faster payments for settlement, and particularly FedNow, and obviously RTP has been out there for a while. I was just reminded because our practice lead Dean Nolan, who's kind of big on digital assets on real-time settlement, just joined. And so I guess the question I have for you: are you getting much requests for integrating with some of these faster payment systems like FedNow or RTP, or are you not seeing a lot of that?
We haven't in our space, to be honest. And again, we're in that smaller, again, 5 billion less is typically our target. I think that it's maybe just not a conversation that's being had at that level. And I don't know that there's a ton of like knowledge in a lot of these banks or credit unions that have like a vision of how that could work with their existing products or technology. So we've not seen a lot of activity from our target audience.
Well, and it requires a lot of operational changes as well, in that you have to be able to be available or be able to run those payments 24/7, right? So it does require some changes. And again, I'm not the expert. Dean Nolan, who's just joined the call, is, and he could certainly talk to that. But I was just curious if you're getting any development requests around that.
Larry, is a great question, and it's kind of similar to what we're seeing. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about it, and I think a lot of recognition that it's going to be fundamentally change a lot of aspects of payments in the future. And right now it's just a matter of, when's the right time to get engaged with it and everything. And, we're definitely seeing, the banks who are the owner banks of the clearinghouse, they're invested in it. They built their own network. They're trying a lot of use cases. And I think as they find use cases that are good for the broader world, you're seeing the broader banking community jump on board as well. It's close, it's new, and it's payments. Anything in payments takes forever, it seems like. So, yeah. But I appreciate you asking the question. It's good to hear others seeing similar, or not seeing similar, whatever it might be.
Well, and I think that's is to your point. It's just a matter of time with the gig economy and a lot of earned wage access solutions, and people requesting that from their financial institutions. I think ultimately you're gonna need to see them get on board. Seth, what would be some of the maybe one or two big misconceptions that financial institutions have about doing some sort of custom development?
I think the biggest one probably now is cost, right? Because of what we've seen with some of the other providers that have tried to quote out and deliver custom solutions. So I would say cost is probably the biggest one. I think if financial institutions were to look at this and dive deeper, they would see that there are opportunities to build stuff at a pretty reasonable price.
Appreciate that.
The other thing I would say is the changing landscape where there's more options to integrate now than there were in the years past. So the cost and perception around inability to actually build it.
That's awesome. So some more integration and lower cost. Want to make sure I give others on the call an opportunity to ask questions, but before I do that, is there anything we haven't talked about that you want to talk about, or that I should have asked from a question standpoint that I didn't ask?
No, I think we hit on a lot of the topics we were open to. So yeah, if there's other questions from the audience, that'd be great.
Yeah, Larry, I was late, but one of the questions I had was, when you start again in the payments arena, if you guys covered this already, we'll catch up offline, okay? But we hear a lot of discussions, or again, another area of conversation is around payment hubs, right? And they were a thing back 5-10 years ago. It didn't work out too well, and then people went different direction, and now they're back towards this centralized hub to generate their payments out of. And some off the shelf, some a little bit larger banks we know are doing it internally. I just wondering, Seth, is that's an area you guys play in? And again, if it's something you guys were doing before, again, don't want to waste everybody's time.
It's not an area we've played in. We've really focused on smaller scale operational types of projects that we think, there's not a lot of people trying to solve for. I think there's a ton of people in the payment space, and there's a ton of different directions this could go in. So, that's just a little more than we're involved in at this point.
Got it.
You weren't on at the beginning, but my background was in the digital asset space. That's how Larry and I met in the past.
Okay.
We were trying to move away from like these really complex problems that were trying to be solved, and do stuff that we could add immediate value to financial institutions by building smaller product to make their lives easier.
Got it. That makes sense. Appreciate that. Yeah, I was actually not sure I was going to raise my hand and ask questions. I saw you were from Green Bay, and having been born in Chicago, I didn't know if we were actually allowed to talk to each other on these type of events.
I think for professional purposes we can, but I don't know on a personal level if we'll be able to speak.
Seth, I thought all you guys wore these funny like cheese hats too.
Mine melted. It was hot up here last week.
All right. Well, any other questions from anyone on the call? So if there's not, Seth, what's the best way for if you're a financial institution or credit union or fintech for that matter, and they want to reach out to you for maybe a custom development project, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
We've got a form on our website that someone can reach out to or email me directly. I don't know if that's something we can provide, but either via our website or via email would be great.
And your website again for people is, and I'll let you spell it because
Novotta, Novotta.com.
Novotta. All right. Well, Seth, I really appreciate you joining us for our tech talk. Appreciate those who joined us live. Again, we have recorded this, so when that recording's available, we'll put it out there out on YouTube and LinkedIn, and make sure people have an opportunity to access it. But with that, I really want to thank you for your time. It was an interesting conversation, and sounds like, at least from my takeaways, is that custom development is not as expensive as it necessarily has to be, and that some of the integrations that maybe were too difficult to do in the past are easier to do now because technology has advanced, and there's easier, cheaper ways to get that done. So do appreciate you joining us, and with that, we'll wrap things up.
That sounds good. Thanks, Larry.
All right, take care, Seth.
You too.
Bye.